My guest today, Brett Thompson, who was formerly known as the barbecue or Braai Guy, is now the leader at the helm of Newform Foods, embodying a shift towards sustainable food systems. Brett has a background in finance and economics from South Africa, and he is active in advocacy for vegetarianism and has led a decade-long tenure at the Fry's Family Food Company, which is a major plant-based meat provider in South Africa. Brett is a vocal advocate for meat reduction campaigns, delivering TEDxCapeTown talks and other talks for the future of food. He's working globally to reduce conventional animal culture by 50% by 2040. Brett's dedication to reshaping our food landscape makes him a leading force in sustainable entrepreneurship. A little bit about Newform Foods. Newform Foods is revolutionizing the food industry by leveraging a vast continent-spanning research and development network. Its mission is to assist food producers, retailers, and business owners in developing and scaling cultivated animal products at a fraction of the industry's traditional cost. So today I'm here with Brett Thompson. Brett is the CEO and co-founder of Newform Foods, which is based in South Africa. We're going to learn a lot more about that, so I won't spoil it. But without further ado, Brett, great to have you here. Been looking forward to this for a long time. Also, happy to hear that you're going to be in Switzerland in the next couple of weeks if you're not here already. But maybe you want to just take a few minutes to introduce yourself, what you do, where you're based. I know that, I'm here in Europe, and I know that you're, paving the way down in the other end of the world at the tip of Africa. So I'm interested to hear what you're up to.
Yeah, Daniel, great to be here. Thanks very much for having me and to your team. Yeah, as you just heard, briefly who I am and also getting excited. I'm still in Cape Town. I'm heading off Switzerland in a few days' time. So I'm going to be there for a week. So looking forward to meeting you in person as well. So that's gonna be great. I'll just give a quick background check on who I am, just to sort of set up a bit about what we're doing in Newform and why we're doing it, and my excitement and interest in our approach. I left varsity and I started working in alternative protein. I guess it's quite a few and a rare amount of people that have done something like that. I basically wrote my thesis back in the day in 2009, 10, or whatever it was, on alternative protein and economics, because that was my real interest at the time. And really just walked out of varsity with no idea, kind of dropped out. And didn't complete my master's, but I got a job at a company here in South Africa called Fry's Family Foods, or at the time Fry's Vegetarian. And they were Africa's largest and one of the largest players in the world producing plant-based meats. And I got thrown into an early-ish stage company at the time, and just did sales and marketing, did everything and anything from the startup, almost like a startup. I think the way that the team was run, family business, and got like a really sort of ground up view from production, packaging, to merchandising, to buyers, to like just that whole, how food gets, or mass production food, or fast moving consumer goods gets from not fork to table, from farm to table. And I just was always interested in. I've stopped eating meat, years before that, and had always been interested in the alternative protein solution at the stage, or I guess to try and reduce animal suffering, environment destruction, and improve health. And it was quite nice to see a company who was trying to go out, and their whole core and purpose was to try and be part of that solution. And then after my time there, I got a job up in Germany, and I decided I'd been doing a lot of animal advocacy in South Africa. I ran a campaign called Meat Free Mondays, which was a sort of non-profit arm of the company that I worked at, doing meat reduction campaigns, speaking to businesses and schools and radio and all that, trying to like get South Africans to understand the connection between what we eat and some of the problems that we face as a society and a civilization. Learned that it's not easy to tell people in South Africa, and I think around the world, to don't eat meat. That's probably my biggest learning after speaking to around 20,000 people in like not one-on-one, but in front of them. And then I spent 2 years in Germany working at an NGO. So I did a bit of a flip. I got an opportunity to work at an organization called Beyond Carnism and Pro Veg International. Spent some time working in an internationalization department, met really cool people from all over the world, Denmark to the Netherlands to China, spent some time with scientists and startup entrepreneurs. And that's where I'd known about cultivated meat for this length of time, but I'd always seen plant-based as the solution. Like, this is how we nudge the majority of people off a conventional animal-based diet. And introduced not just to cultivated, but precision fermentation, all the stuff which was cutting edge, 2015, 16, 17, like, and then introduced it firsthand. And now to like sort of pause on my bio, but I came back to South Africa just before COVID, saw this opportunity, connected with some like-minded people who were the people that helped start the company. We started it 2 weeks before COVID lockdown, and sort of the rest is history. But yeah, the first couple of months we were bootstrapping a biotech company as you had a hard lockdown in South Africa, which I think is another conversation in itself. But that really gave the grounding to how challenging and difficult it is to start, run, and maintain a startup with aspirations to growth.
And particularly in such a very new technological field, right? I mean, I think that there are so many regulatory questions and open, unanswered, just unanswered questions around the whole space. But I'd interested to get more into that. Well, I mean, super interesting background. By the way, I love South Africa. I was there last year for an offsite. I've been there a couple of times, and I think it'll be, well, you live in Germany, but when you're here in Switzerland, one thing that I was really taken by when I moved to Switzerland in particular, I'm from America, but I lived in the UK and Germany and then came to Switzerland. I've been here for 15 years. Meat is very expensive here because people, first of all, they protect the localized farming. So importation costs of protein and meat is very high. So you essentially pay a lot for small amounts of meat. But I don't know if this is true for every family in Switzerland because they still do love to eat meat. Cheese and dairy is a big thing because of course they produce that locally, right? And it's pretty good. But yeah, I'm always shocked when I go to the States, or last week I was in Turkey, like how core meat is to every meal. I didn't grow up eating a lot of meat. We still don't eat tremendous amounts, but when you go to South Africa, you see that it is part of the culture in a major way. So I'm interested to maybe you can reflect a little bit about even working in the plant-based space. I mean, were you just sort of the odd duckling out as a company doing plant-based in South Africa? Which is, I mean, not only is it like a meat-eating culture, it's got a huge amount of space and land and places to grow to raise animals. So I would think that the cost of acquiring meat is not an issue. Like people can probably afford it. So it's just, go for it, eat a lot of it.
Look, I think, look, there's South Africa in our DNA is, if you had to ask the average South African, well, most South Africans, would be two things. It would be rugby and meat. And we're pretty good at rugby. If you follow it, we sort of always give it a shout out. We 2 times champions, and I'm a big fan of the Springboks. But then when it comes to any social interaction, you don't go and say, do you want to come over to my house for dinner? You don't go, let's go, you say let's go out to a restaurant. But for the most times, if you meet a South African and you're new to town, that said you must come over for a braai. So braai is Afrikaans for barbecue. And there's other versions of it, shish and nyama, which is Zulu or Xhosa. But fundamentally, meat on a fire is how South Africans, for the most part, interact and socialize. There's reasons for that, but it's a sunny country. You've got a lot of good. The weather's great, so people love being outdoors. It's an outdoors place as well, and I think a lot of people are pretty close to nature. I think compared to the rest of definitely Europe and other parts of the world. So meat is crucial. Now, if you then look at meat consumption in South Africa, well, on average, it's slow. It's low. If you look, we're 60 million people in this country. Our middle class is 10% of that. So it's a tiny middle class who have created, probably eat meat in the same levels of your Luxembourgs in Europe and those big meat eaters in the States. But so that is aspirational for the rest of the country. So I think that is a slight difference. So the perception often is people is it's a big meat eating country, which it is for middle class and up, but for everybody else it's not. Now meat is definitely cheaper here than the rest of the world, but again, the majority of people living under a certain economic brackets, because we have a significant amount of people living below and around the poverty line, they're not eating the greatest cuts of meat. Whole tripe, which is like I think it's the same sort of innards and necks and snouts and all that is very common. However, if you go into a township, chicken is prevalent. Backyard slaughter is prevalent, and you'll go into a township and there'll be guys cooking on rotisserie chickens on sort of mass scale, let's say, on a not a rotisserie chicken, but on a grill, and those guys will be doing it out of a drum bin, and but that rate of sale is incredible. They are pumping protein. So it's an interesting country to try and ascertain what is the exact culture, but there are variations of it. But regardless, people want to eat meat and they want to eat more. That's until you get to the sort of higher end, which is the same as the rest of the world, where they are trying to cut. I think so that's describing South Africa. And like, one day if you come back, or when you come back, if you come watch the Springboks play at the All Blacks, which is our main rival, it's a cultural phenomenon which I think everybody should experience, probably close to like a Super Bowl type of thing. And yes, firstly, personally, I went from being the guy that was the braai guy. I grabbed the tongs first. I was happy to be making the fire and cooking meat for everybody when I was in my 20s, and then stopped for ethical reasons and discussions when I was like in my mid 20s. You are labeled vegetarian is a swear word. I think it's like I think a lot of parts of the world as well. I think that's
kind of like somebody who's a teetotaler, right? Like goes to the party and
sometimes I've stopped drinking beer just to try and check out my gut, keep it sort of for summer. And like if you're eating meat and not drinking beer, like don't go out. I think is the solution. But so luckily I still drink beer. That's vegan every time I check. And so for myself it was difficult. Like it was constant people would give you gears and make fun of you, and it's fine, it's all tongue in cheek and stuff, and obviously it does take its toll every now and again, and you just like, I just want to eat my veggie hot dog and not have a conversation about it. But I think for me, I went, whatever is part of my nature, I just went and started researching a lot, because people would argue with me about this, and I like to discuss and debate and get involved in discussion, and I enjoy the conversation, the debate on any topic, but particularly this one at that stage in my life. And I spent all this time researching this work for no reason, to go around and argue with friends over beers at a bar. Like it's the value, the return on the investment was incredibly low for all this time that I'd reading papers for no reason. And I won't bore you with the whole story, but I was going to write my original paper on monetary policy. And I had a thesis supervisor, and that was the plan. And I had this like aha moment when I was doing my postgrad. And I was like, why don't I just try and write a paper on economics and veganism and vegetarianism at the time. And I did. And that got me the job. I sent that to Fry's, to Tammy Fry, who was the daughter and marketing director and only person in the marketing team at Fry's at that stage. But like, just to give you a quick history of Fry's.
Well, like what caused them to start doing it, right?
So
like, I mean,
that story is even better that's way better than mine. And I think it's crucial to try and understand like some of these. So they started the company in 1991.
Oh, wow.
Now, 1991 in South Africa. So this is like, I mean, apartheid was not even finished yet. I mean, that's I mean, that predates my high school graduation, and those around the times that was so very different place. Different place. I mean, you've got Nelson Mandela was out of prison, I think, by geography. I mean, my history sometimes gets a bit flaky, but we hadn't had the referendum to vote for allowing for essentially a democratic election. It was pre-94, which was when Mandela came to power. It's just a very different landscape. They start this company. Now, Wally and Debbie Fry are the founders, and they're that's where the name, it literally is their name. It's not like a lot of people thought it was like a marketing bit, but it's like, no, they needed a name, so they stuck their name on it.
Mm.
And Wally was this like karate guy. Like, I'm going to go a little bit deep here, but he's a karate guy, but he was like very like sporty and everything. But he married a woman who was born vegetarian,
Mm-hmm.
and she used to rescue the goats that he was trying to sell. This is a true story.
Yeah.
And then after a while, like he has they have a baby, and Tammy is the baby. Tammy doesn't eat meat. So now Wally's like, what? First, he thinks his wife and daughter are in serious harm's way because they're not eating enough protein. So anyway, so he gets together and he starts cooking around. He was a builder at the time, and he became quite a successful builder. And then he starts to like experimenting in the kitchen with soy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the backdrop of this, South Africa's got one of the largest. I think it fights for other countries, but populations of Indians outside of India in the world.
Okay.
So
Which,
now, and they're all
many Indians are vegetarian, right? Many.
and there's some nuances here in South Africa compared to others, but we have a lot. It's on the East Coast. It's called Durban. It's Durban. Mm-hmm. It's a port city, and that's where the majority of Indians live. And South African Indians are predominantly Hindu. Well, definitely they were in the 90s. They've also, religion and things have changed over the last few decades, but they all fast during certain periods of time of the year. Now, that doesn't mean like sort of the Muslim fast where it's, no food, whatever, during like sun to set or whatever it is. They'll abstain from animal products for the most part. Mm-hmm. So the retailers at the time, prior to fries existing, were seeing this very weird change in South Africa, or in the one province of South Africa, where you've got these big fluctuations in consumption of meat and other plant proteins. And that's where fries utilized. I mean, I don't think that's what, Wally didn't know this at the time, but when Wally launched fries at that stage, they were able to capitalize on these two fasting periods during the year, where it's called per tussie, and forgive me, I can't remember the other one, but it's a month and 2 weeks on either side. And you just see this complete shift in consumption habits. And so fries was able to really capitalize off that for the first 10 to 15 years. And so the company built a strong base in KwaZulu-Natal, what's called now, but we're able to service a growing vegetarian and vegan community throughout South Africa. But we're able to get that real sales pull-through in the one like their stronghold that would leverage growth in other parts, which were people, meat reducers, Buddhists, a whole range of other different types of people. So people ask me, why does fries exist in South Africa? Because it shouldn't. Because South Africa in the 90s you would never, if I had to tell you about South Africa in the 90s, you'd be like, you would never start a meat alternative business there. But because of sort of under this other component to it, it catapulted and allowed fries to, do what they've done, and they own, I think, 80-90% of the market here still.
And are these businesses, when you talk about these, they're pretty much strictly South Africa, or do they sell into other neighboring states, or, like how linked is the African market, in between countries?
I think this is probably the biggest problem with Africa is the difficulty to like move product, people, resources around the continent, not just from bureaucracy, which trust me is a big part of it, but the roads in certain areas are fantastic. You can, you can run the length of Africa pretty much, you'll be fine. But the cold chain in South Africa is not great. South Africa is different to the rest of the continent. So we struggled when I was at Fry's to move product. It's not impossible, but to go from South Africa to Namibia to Angola, firstly, it's far. And it doesn't have the types of cold chain that you might see in a similar distance in Europe. And again, the geography is just more difficult. It's not flat. It's whereas Europe it's a lot smaller. So and I can even say from an entrepreneur just trying to like, capital doesn't move around borders as quickly at all. And even as an entrepreneur trying to, like, I was in Nigeria a couple of months ago for a conference where it was incredibly difficult for those are the two largest economies in Africa, South Africa and Nigeria. And for me to fly there was not a simple process. The visas, the bureaucracy when you land. So I think that's definitely a reason that keeps Africa where it is. I think it's not impossible to solve, but it's unfortunate that like essentially red tape holds people back, and movement of people, etc. So, but moving product is also difficult, and if you don't have a cold chain, you can't move a product like fries as easily because yes, Kenya, some parts of Tanzania, maybe even Zimbabwe and Namibia, that's fine. But like really distribute and penetrate markets, it's difficult to do it in Africa. Mauritius was a big market for us, just out of that
But
and
Mauritius is relatively wealthy, isn't
yeah,
it correct? Because it's got a huge
yeah.
tourist industry and things like this, right?
Just,
Yeah.
I mean, they've also been pretty smart with how they position themselves. It's closing now, but as a like real, for capital, they were making it very friendly for people to invest. And a lot of South African companies have set up a domicile in Mauritius to help get around change controls, for example.
Right.
So yeah, I think so. Mauritius, and also it's got a large Hindu population as well, so that's why there was good product moving there. Yeah, the other thing, like Nigeria, it's a massive country, but all their protein is, backyard slaughter as well. You go to markets there, and it's fresh markets. So to try and come in from a centralized approach through a supermarket, very difficult. Kenya is different. It's a bit better. It's far, but Fry's major markets were Australia, UK, Europe, now US. So they shipped product, and I think they've got. I'm not as close now, but I think they do manufacture elsewhere. But I think, to be honest, as an African company, it's like quite difficult to properly. I mean, it is possible. We've got some of the major supermarkets like ShopRite here in South Africa. They distribute throughout the continent, and I think they'd make an argument that it is possible, but it's not as easy as it could be.
Okay. Yeah, I mean but look, I mean, I think that those are the areas of the world that are also long-term growing, right? Like the populations are growing and things. So I think it's a super interesting space to be in. I think it's also you feel a sense of adventure when you go there, at least for someone comes from, I mean, I come from a very developed country, and I live in a very developed place, but interesting. So you basically saw a similar opportunity to address a similar market in South Africa in cultivated meat. So tell us about the story of, because I know that you started Newform, but it was a different name at first, correct? Right?
Yeah.
Like you were actually producing a product. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got into that. And in the process, it would be great because I think a lot of people that might listen to this may not really understand what cultivated meat means. Like what are you really doing? What's required? What are the barriers? How realistic is it that you actually can produce this? All of those types of things. I think that there's a lot of like every time I read a major mainstream media article about it, it hardly ever dives into what the science or the product really is. It talks about policy and opinion, and they don't pay much mind to the nuts and bolts of what's going on, right?
Yeah, so let me try and firstly, there's been some pretty good mainstream media articles, thorough, good, not is the right word, because they've been quite critical. Really digging into some of the tech because of some of the mismatch between the claims by the larger cultivated meat companies that they made in 2013 versus what was able to achieve in that first decade. So there is some changes there, and I'm sure listeners can just Google. There's a New York Times article, Bloomberg, and I think it's good to get a grounded sort of understanding of the tech and some of the criticisms. So I'll start maybe just quickly on like the high level on what we do, and then I'll give you the story about Mzansi, and then try come back to some of those things on the barriers and obviously the scale up, because that's kind of that's basically the why Mzansi went to Newform. And hopefully I'll get onto that why. At a high level, the process is that us Newform Foods takes a selection or biopsy of cells from a donor animal. We currently work with a sanctuary that's close to Cape Town called Greyton Farm Animal Sanctuary. We've been able to successfully take biopsies or isolations from lambs, cows, and pigs, excuse me, eventually becoming pork. And once you take a biopsy, that's great, but that's obviously very much the start. Cells in
And
themselves.
that's a slightly invasive process, similar to
Yeah.
what somebody might have if they do like a cancer test or something like that. It's a yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like we kind of say like it's a mole,
Okay.
it's 'cause there might be some like as a mole you've got to take out the roots. There
Yeah.
might be some slightly, but the process we work, I mean, we work with the sanctuary's got a big incentive to have their animals to be have good well-being, because that's what they're all about. So we've built a relationship with them over the last 4 years. We work with a independent vet during this time who does the actual process. It's punch biopsy, which just it means it's like it's about the size of a peppercorn of the collection that we get, and we do it during when the animal goes into routine operation, so they'll be under. So that we just minimize any discomfort. And I've been there, I've seen the process a number of times, and look, it is discomforting because it's like you're getting a mole removed, but with some sedatives, and then once about 45 minutes later, those animals are running around, and they're
Yeah.
happy.
Okay.
And they live a very good life on the sanctuary, and that's so
I
why
bet. I bet they do.
definitely a lot better than where they could be. And I think, and we also, so now that's with mammalian animals. So we've done those three, and that's been our core focus in the beginning. But we're now building a platform with the goal to be agnostic to the species. So we're looking at seafood, soon poultry, and other types of tissue culture that might be interesting for us going forward. The core technology the focus of the technology at the moment is mammalian cells, and part of that reason is because it's easier. The availability for protocols for tissue culture is based off mammalian tissue culture, so anyone can go out and find it. Now, what we've done for the last 4 years is optimize the process to go from an isolation to what we call cell line development, which essentially means, as a word, the cells are now developing consistently. We're basically trying to create stable cell lines that ultimately become commercial. And stable for me, we're trying to ensure, doubling time is uniform, for example. In nature, it's not. Cells after a while stop growing. And what we're trying to do is create a cell line where we don't have to go back to the animal. And that's crucial for a variety of things, but also from the ability to scale and have a cell line that can be duplicated and sent to other parts of the world without needing to go to another animal, for example, is quite crucial. So that stable cell line, or that commercially viable cell line, is sort of what we try and do. And that's our IP. That's what we've developed. And we've also found a pretty good way of doing it quite quickly in relation to other parts of the world. So to give you an example, our first R&D run took us about 18 months to go from a cell to a burger, which was pretty fast in comparison to larger companies. And there's a number of reasons, and I can get to it why. But next stage,
and that's just to grow the culture from the cell. It takes the 18 months to allow it to grow and feed it and all that stuff.
No, so that first 18 months is R&D. There's a lot of cells growing, dying.
Okay.
Working on a media formulation, feeding that to the cells. That didn't work. That was the 18 months was to get to the Goldilocks conditions that we were now confident that we can now replicate that. That process now takes 3 to 4 weeks because we've done it so many times now. And there's guys in the Netherlands, for example, Meatable, good guys up there who they could do it in like 3 or 4 days. So there's a bit of an arms race between companies and saying like, what is an optimal time? But I think there will be a variety of companies trying to find what is the optimal growth rate, because it's about the yields that you get over time. Really, that's more important, because like you need to find the best time to grow those cells full scale. So that first stage, that cell line development, and that's kind of the first part of the product offering that Newform is offering to companies, is to say, Mr. Seafood Company or Mr. Retailer, Mrs. Retailer, we'll take a bespoke cell line and we'll develop it for you. What would you like? And that approach has been quite appealing to a few companies that we've been engaging with, where we can, where they can have exclusive access to a cell line that they then decide at a later stage grow to, start getting to scale up mode. But the key thing is, on the cell line development part of it, is that it's quite difficult to sell the whole process. Sometimes companies get a little bit inundated or overwhelmed by the tech. So we've been trying to break up a lot of what we've been doing into like prototype and scale up, as opposed to saying we'll put a burger in every restaurant that you own, for example.
Right.
But that's maybe more on the product offering side. But again, now back to what we do with that cell line. Those cell lines need to eat. Like if you think about it, this process is similar to brewing beer, whereas you've got ethanol, which is produced through yeast being fed glucose. We are taking animal cells, and feeding them it's a bit of a nutrient collection, but then that's what they're feeding and then duplicating. That's what we're doing. That nutrient broth, in the beginning when we started, was about 50 ingredients. Okay, glucose, amino acids, vitamins, proteins, and also serum that is derived from animals. Now, that serum is to help boost growth and get the cells to switch on and talk to each other. Now, when we started, that 50 ingredients, when we did the calculation, was about $120 per liter. Too expensive, as you can imagine. If you're trying to think about kg equals a liter, it's not gonna happen. So the whole journey of what the industry has done over the last 10 years, including us, is to take those 50 ingredients and say, how do we move the 50 ingredients that we have at the moment from pharmaceutical grade, which is what they are? We were buying them off the shelf from your Thermo Fishers and your big guys. It was pure, it was consistent, but it's too expensive. So what my team's done over the last 4 years is take those, and we've now moved, basically we've knocked out all those ingredients to be food grade, except we're still working, and so is the industry, and there are variations and disputes on this topic, that growth factors we use are still sometimes animal derived. So you might have heard of fetal bovine serum. It's it's quite a topic, but I like to bring it up just because we actively are working not just from an ethical perspective. We want to remove it from an ethical, but the economics means we'll stay at like $40-50 per liter if we don't get rid of FBS. So if we get rid of FBS and a few others, we get that price point down to less than $1. And we're somewhere like we're just below halfway in that journey to getting from $120 to like that dollar mark. And the dollar mark is kind of seen as a sweet spot for commercialization into larger bioreactors that I'm sure some of your listeners might know, or viewers might know, that is similar, akin to what a brewery looks like. So at a high level, you've got those two components: cell line development, media development. You put those together, the cells grow. They need to grow in something. We start off the process, and just jump in if there's any questions.
No, it's interesting. It's good. Go
ahead. We start off the process in sort of 2D. Cells are adherent. They're called adherent. They're like you are not 2D, but your cells are growing on top of each other.
There's layers basically,
layers,
right?
So they grow, and then oxygen feeds them, and blood feeds them, and whatever. And we're trying to recreate that with some of the nutrients that we feed those cells. But the way for this to scale is to be done, and this is also another discussion within the industry, is to look at doing it through suspension cell lines. So cells that have been adapted either through through iteration and spontaneity, or through editing, and that's another component, so that those cells can grow in essentially in 3D, which is a liquid, a large volume of liquid, where your surface area just expands drastically. Like when you do it in 3D, you restrict it to the actual what you've got available in your incubator, and other ways to attach this, and growing it on cell scaffolding, etc., are ways that the industry is looking at it. But the problem with that, and there's pros and cons, but the problem with scaffolding is, first, it's another cost, and then you'll always have a blended product. You'll never have a purely cultivated muscle mass. If you're introducing scaffolds into it, you can wash it down and strip it off, but then there's another layer in your production that you've got to worry about. So for the most part, what the industry is trying to do is adapt a cell line with the correct media into a bioreactor that those cells can grow in what we call suspension. That bioreactor, which we're at pilot right now, pre-pilot, but what people are trying to get to is like 10,000 to 250,000, maybe in a modular build. Yeah.
Leader by that's the liters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
liters,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and then that's where in that size quantum, you're going to start going from about a ton upwards to 10, 100 tons of meat per month.
And when we say meat, I think this is the other thing is like,
Yeah, okay.
what actually comes out of that? Like, what is the substance? What does it look like, feel like, taste like? What can you use it for? Because, obviously you don't pull a bunch of steaks out of a bioreactor. Like
Yeah.
that's not happening.
I thought that in the beginning, but no.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it was like that, it would have been a lot easier. So I love this discussion. And where we're at and where a lot of the industry's at,
Yeah.
is that first 2 or 3 stages where
Mm.
it's a bioreactor which creates muscle mass, and you
Mm.
either create muscle or you can create fat. People are looking at blood, and there's a couple other aspects to it, but the industry, for the most part, to my knowledge, is focusing on those 2 ingredients, muscle and fat, because for the most part, that's the large majority of what meat is. The long tail is connective tissue, bone marrow, blood vessels, and a whole bunch of other things that make up meat, which I think the industry, well, I think I also didn't know this, but I don't think the industry understood how difficult it would be to be able to recreate all of that when they started this 10 years ago. I think it's not impossible to do, but I think it's going to take some time. I think so. What is coming out of those bioreactors is raw muscle tissue that's unstructured.
Okay.
So and that looks like, I describe it as kind of raw chicken, but soft.
Okay.
Because we're not growing blood at the moment. We can, but in terms of, if like we're a startup, where do we focus our energy? If we focus our energy on, connective tissue, blood, and etc., I don't think it will be the best use of our time. And what we found is that muscle tissue, particularly the cells that we use, which are fibroblasts, they've got a fattiness to them as well. So us just adding, and our focus over the last year has been on a hybrid product, is where we take between 20 and 50% of cultivated muscle and fat, and then introduce that into plant protein.
Right.
And that's the final application that our current process is doing. And I say current is because, there is a completely next stage of the journey that others would, be shouting at me now saying, why am I not talking about it? But I think that stage of the journey is important, and I'm happy to get into it. But right now, what we've found is developing hybrid products with 20 to 50% muscle mass in it is far superior than a plant-based meat product. Is it better than a processed meat burger?
Superior in terms of taste, texture, this
Taste,
kind of like carnivorous sort of feeling that you have, because a lot of plant-based products are clearly very flavored, and some of them are chewy. By the way, I'm still amazed by the variety of quality of plant-based products, that come from different suppliers. It's interesting to me that they don't learn from each other, but it doesn't seem to be the case. But I can imagine that if you have real kind of flesh cells in there, I've never had a cultivated meat product, I haven't had the chance, that you would have more of this sensation. Yeah. So yeah.
So next time you're in Cape Town, we've got to sort that
Okay.
out. So
yeah, that would be great. I mean, by the way, to your point, in Singapore, for example, like I think Just was offering this when they became regulated in Singapore, but the ability, I was there 2 years ago, like they only serve like, at that time, they were serving like 4 or 5 different actual servings per week, right? Like you had to get on a waiting list. So it wasn't really that people were able to access it. But I suspect that that's changed now, in certain places.
Look, I think there's a lot of challenges over the last 18 months with big companies, small companies in this industry. No, it's not changed. Singapore is a great example of like intentions that were correct, but there seems to be a lot of struggle there because it just doesn't have the sound like. It's not a big place. So, you've got to like go big to actually get to the scale to actually service the market. And I think a lot of my understanding is a lot of with that regulatory environment that was like made for like the sandbox, that a lot of people went there. It might be a bit of a gold rush at one stage. And then I think after a while, they're like, well, it doesn't make that much sense to all of us to build here, And I don't think that everyone is, but like all the last big announcements have come out of Singapore. And to give you another example, like Good Meat, who like the trailblazers in our industry, They just did a launch last week in retail. It's the first time it's ever happened. So everyone has ever done it in service.
Mm.
And they only used 3% cultivated meat.
Right. But
So
still, I mean, it's a start. I think, I mean, in
it's
my
definitely a
business,
start.
we deal with consumer insight and consumer acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Consumer acceptance is a continuum, right? And, you know, you're talking a lot about cost and speed. And of course, in every new innovation, and it happens across all types of innovation, you have major gains in cost, speed, improvement over time. Like, I mean, there's theories that even dictate this. And so that will happen. But then there's also the point of like introducing it through products where the acceptance comes at the right stage. And
Yeah.
maybe that's where you're going with the discussion around Newform is being a contributor to this in some way, because the food supply chain is very complicated, right? Like you don't just
Yeah.
pop out a product out of a machine someplace, right? Like there's a lot of things that go into the supply chain to make it work at the end in
Yeah.
terms of the consumer
Yeah.
acceptance.
No, it's like
Yeah.
I agree. And some of the early research that I looked at when we started the company was that this idea of a whole cut cultivated meat product might
Yeah.
be a bit too soon to launch, even though like the industry wasn't ready to do it.
Yeah.
Um, we've, what with our shift and focusing exclusively and engaging with companies, and mainly in South Africa, but that's why I'm coming in Switzerland and the UK, is that there is there's only applications, I think, with this. There are companies that want to try out 5-10% processed hybrid products that they can, go mass market as soon as they can and see what happens from the market and either kick it to touch or carry on. Where there's others are saying that they want to take a long form 10-year view on this and say, we want 100% cultivated beef by X amount of time. And we're having both those conversations. And Newform is trying to create a technology that is capital light that can help other players scale up, much quicker than we would do if we did it ourselves. Mainly because we're not food manufacturers. These guys are the
Right.
ones that have been doing it. I mean, the guys that process red meats have been doing it for way longer than us. I don't want to go and reinvent that. Like, how do we plug into that system? So I think the hybrid model, which Good Meat have done, and there's discrepancies between the different companies around the world and our space trying to do it, but I think the hybrid model is the correct one. It's a foot in the door, and it's getting feedback from the consumer and seeing what they think about it. Because we've done our own experiments, and food is more food science. So we've taken zero cultivated, 100% plant-based, okay, which is a plant-based burger, and then we've gone up to 50%. And there is a sweet spot at about 10% that we found that there were significant changes to the way it cooked, the way the smoke, like I think people always forget that cooking is not, I mean, eating is not the only part. It's like when you're mom or whatever, you start making the burgers for your kids, or your whatever, that smell in the beginning is part of it. That smoke is part of it. And the mouthfeel, like the way that the fattiness of and it was quite, sorry, I'm rambling here a bit, but the last time we did a tasting a couple of weeks ago, and the woman came up to me and she just said, like, she had one of our lamb meatballs, and she like, it was like half an hour afterwards, and she came up to me and she's like at the event afterwards, and she's like, I could still get that lingering, profile, which aftertaste with meat is kind of known. Some people like even get excited about having meat sweats, so whereas a lot of people, particularly in the plant-based industry, like, and I know this because I was part of that for 10 years, is like, let's make something very healthy as quick as possible. Let's get it out there. Yes, it's salt and flavor and whatever, but like, it's still, doesn't have trans fat and this and that. And it cooks quickly. And it's like, well, people actually want something that cooks slowly, and it's got fattiness. It's a bit of a labor of love. So anyway, that product, I think the cells that we develop and the muscle tissue and the fat enhances in the beginning. And I think it needs time to allow for consumer acceptance before we can start really putting that second phase of technology in to really say, steak, chicken breasts.
I agree. I mean, I kind of, we did a lot of testing on these plant-based products, consumer profiling and things, and you could see there was a lot of trial being driven, but at the end they were over-promising. And I think they kind of like understanding what is the kind of promise and proposition versus the delivery, and also then who are you targeting, right? Like certain early adopter consumers will be there with you even if the product is quote unquote inferior, but then you'll get wider acceptance as the product becomes more and more similar to the actual experience. And now, I mean, thanks to this like very large, I think, wave of investment in plant-based that happened between 2019 and 2021 or so, the distribution is there. Like now, like many places I go, like, I was at an event on Monday, just like for a sport event, because we had a day off here. And the kiosk that's selling burgers also has a plant-based product, right? So like they're out there, they're on the menu, but of course now the key is how to improve them, make them better, things like that. What about using this to enhance just like a ground beef burger? I mean, that then you have less input from an animal product, which solves some of those environmental and ethical issues in part, or is that just not what the industry is focused on? Right?
So, look, this is quite I mean, in South Africa, we had that, 20 years ago because people used to put soy in mince to bulk
Yeah.
it up. There was just a thing you did from it to make it cheap. And obviously, when it's like a meat being introduced, like having plant-based introduced to it, it's seen as cheapening the product, which kind of gives a lot of insights without me having to say anything more. I think, then you've got, and I've seen companies doing mushroom, for example, with like these are now like 2.0 version of how do we meat reduce, and they're putting mushrooms into beef burgers. I've seen company like do chicken into beef, and it's an environmental burger now because it's, beef's got bad environmental footprint, but chicken's better. And then yeah, like there's the mycelium and the microprotein guys, the Better Meat Co. It's an American company who are also trying to do fillers for mycelium type products into reducing the amount of meat. The thing is, like, I think it probably often is done to cost save, and at the moment, cultivated meat has still got years to get to a price point that makes sense.
Okay, so it would basically just make the product more expensive,
It'll
essentially
make
what
it
you're
more
saying.
expensive. It'll make
Okay.
it more novelty, but like,
Yeah.
if you've, and so what we're saying is the application that we're providing our companies that we work with is the ability to take a component of fats, for example, like fats, and say we can enhance like 5% fat in a plant-based burger that's animal derived, an animal derived fat in a plant-based burger can have some significant changes in the taste profile. And we're talking to plant-based meat companies in a couple of regions, and they are bracing themselves for that hybrid, potentially that hybrid revolution or whatever it is. So I think it might be the case in the future when you're making such cultivated meat has hit price parity, and it doesn't really matter. It's just coming from it's getting blended at a factory. But I think in the interim it will be difficult, and I think you probably have to focus on the positive attributes of cultivated, which will be improved taste, and will it be better than conventional beef? It hopefully is the same. So it's quite difficult to like half of the burger's bad meat and half of it's good meat. So
Yeah.
I'm open to discussions, but I think it would be I'd be surprised.
Yeah, and I mean, what you're describing sounds very practical in terms of the continuum of this as well. Like when you think about like electric cars, like everyone thinks, well, we're gonna have electric and self-driving cars, and all of a sudden you're gonna have, hundreds of thousands of truck drivers out on the street collecting welfare.
Yeah.
I mean, like just the continuum of the change is so much slower than that, that like the world will adapt. And I think this is also one of those industries, and food is even slower because the consumer really hangs on to tradition and emotion for a generation, right? Like I think that people make step changes in the way they consume up to a certain age is what we've observed is once you start to get into your 30s, people are a bit more stubborn about their changes, and younger folks are. So you just have to spend the time to wait and just continue to improve, even if you're not getting kind of this super positive hockey stick feedback that you might hope for. Which brings me, conscious of time, to a question that I think is pivotal to all this is like, what about financing and the whole innovation space around this? Like either like financing for your company or the type of financing, because, time value of money and return on investment capital over time is clearly got to be something that people think about, but it's a long game, right? Obviously it's a huge industry and it's a huge opportunity. It's important for sustainability over time. I believe that many developed economies are starting to realize that. but still, right? Like, it's not something that happens overnight. It costs
No,
money to develop these things, right?
yeah.
So,
Look, I think the our industry, look, it's a challenging time, but I think food tech is a biotech. A lot of companies would say that the funding availability in now, and you can see the graphs. It's like 2019, 2020. It was like, people getting cashing out for nothing, and then 22, 23, it's dipped, and there's and like my insight and who I chat to folks, and I know there's a lot of companies that are closing and the zombie companies. So within cultivated meat, there is a lot of challenges on the way from the ability to get access to funds. And I think what happened is, and this also came out in the last couple of years, where I think even like I think is from Aleph, the Israeli company, the CEO Didier, he's like he also came out in a very thoughtful piece about how he had made some mistakes, particularly in the promises that were made
mm,
in you could do a prototype in 2013 or 2016,
mm,
and we know now that that's not the biggest challenge. And I think a lot of guys, made a whole bunch of assumptions based off the quick that speed at which they were able to go from 0 to 1, and then
mm,
not understanding the 1 to many. And
mm,
so the industry's raised like cultivated meat now, $3 billion, I think, roughly.
mm,
There's been, and that's obviously predominantly VC type, there's and some, I guess, sovereign funds or whatever it is, but
mm,
the majority is still VC. And you go to VC in 2013 and say, like, in 7 years' time, I'm going to be building a facility that services half of, the northern seaboard, or whatever, not the northeast.
mm.
That's difficult to come back in 2020 and say, like, actually, we need a bit more money.
Right, right.
So I think a lot of VCs, particularly in the food tech space, and we know them, and they've got burnt to some degree. And it's not like all these companies have failed, but they've just not been able to come on the promises that were made.
Mm,
And when you raise mostly like $3 billion, and you say you're going to put steel on the ground, I'm quoting somebody who said this at a recent conference. It's not, VCs don't want to hear that after a while. They
mm,
want technology, not infrastructure. That's
right.
anybody can do.
Yeah.
So having said that, what we took on is that we're in South Africa, we're at the bottom of Africa. Raising
Yeah.
capital, as you can imagine, is not easy. It's
Mhm.
we've got really great investors and investors from South Africa and Africa that have come in and helped us get to where we are. But we knew we couldn't. We worked out a year ago when we changed our name, we changed our approach. The whole thing is that we had to be capital light, and we
Mhm.
had to work a way of internationalizing the technology that we can develop in South Africa at a fraction of the cost anywhere
Mhm.
else in the world. And that
Yeah,
was
because
and that
because you're paying lower, potentially lower wages, lower lab costs, all the rest of that stuff. Yeah,
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 it's a
uh,
combination of things.
uh,
Manufacturing in South Africa is
uh,
relatively cheap.
uh,
Infrastructure is cheap. The feed required for this, actual scale up will be cheaper. So that was the reason why we did this, and at the same time we were like, we registered our company in another domicile, which was the UK. That gave us access to what's given us access to a lot of grant funding through universities,
mhm, mhm,
partnering with. Then there's just so many incentives in the UK to get funds into innovation through the SEIS and EIS funding. You might be familiar with that. So what I'm getting is that we've diversified our approach to getting
mhm.
funding. We
Right.
are engaging with local governments. We've got 3 discussions with 3 government departments in South Africa. We're looking at
Yeah.
fund. So the point I'm making is that we had to go very diverse, and it's a
Mhm.
challenge, but it's the reason why we're still going as of
Yeah,
what
I love stories like this. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I
yeah,
feel a little bit similar in Switzerland. I mean, I didn't know
yeah.
anybody in Switzerland. We didn't raise money. And I like when I look at Israel or some of our partners in Israel, I'm just amazed at what they achieve. But they don't have as many resources as you do in Silicon Valley, right? But sometimes getting all that money, first of all, it reduces your requirement of being scrappy, right?
Yeah.
And you are not
We say
forced to
resourceful. We
consider.
say resourceful in South
Yeah,
Africa.
yeah. Okay, it's
Just
resourceful. That's better. That's a better, the more
mm,
sophisticated term. But the other thing is that you take on capital, and that capital wants something back. So they're incentivized to get you to spend it, to give you more of it. Or if you're not going to give something back, and you're just like, look, this is a long game, and we're able to play it, they're like, well, that's not how we work. We're not interested in that. So if you can sort of figure out how to be the guerrilla warrior, then
Yeah.
yeah, I think that wins the long game in the food tech industry. And ultimately, distribution is king. So if you can then end up partnering with industry that has a significant amount of distribution, product, brand, and get your tech out that way, then that's how you can more than likely scale. But if you want to build all of that distribution relationship yourself as a single brand, man, that's a lot of money to, to go up against the big guys, right?
And
So
that's just so you agree to everything you said, and that just answers the question you asked me a moment ago why we went from Zanzi Meat to Newform Foods, is that we were trying to build a brand that could build, manufacture, do the tech, and then do the distribution.
Mhm.
We'll partner with the distributor at the end, but like everything else, and it was just the wrong approach.
Mhm.
And Newform Foods, we're a food company now, and
Mhm.
we're focused on technology, and we're trying to do it in a way that's capital light and that can
Mhm.
scale as quickly as possible. And that kind of shift has helped us survive. And
Mhm.
there's the battle scars, but I think there's a lot of companies that either have to innovate on their own. Like the science is one thing, you can innovate there, that's fantastic. But if you don't innovate on yourself as a company, then you also set yourself up for the same levels of shocks that you would do if you were moving the tech along. Yeah.
Yeah, I do it. Like you have to be a good athlete, right? Like good athletes adapt, they get stronger, they learn, they change, and a company has to do the same thing. Otherwise, you know, eventually you'll get innovated out of business. Someone else will come along, right? So you can't just sit on your laurels and say, I'm going to become really good at this. You have to just continue to be good, an agile athlete at the end of the
Yeah.
day. Listen, we're out of time. This is great. I think it's super interesting. Definitely looking forward to meeting you in person next week. Great that you're coming to Switzerland. I think it'll be interesting for you.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot going on here, and I think there's enthusiasm here. It's a very environmentally conscious culture, but also sometimes lacks this kind of scrappiness that you're describing, right? Because there's a bit of money around, enough of it, but sometimes they tend to be a little bit inward focused. So it'll be interesting to see what you think of it. So
Yeah, I'm looking forward. I mean, we're going out for dinner, I think, still. So
yeah,
I'm looking
yeah,
forward to
yeah.
getting meeting in person as again, and yeah, learning a little bit more about the Swiss. Yeah. So thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Looking forward to it. And thanks so much for today. I mean, we didn't get to cover everything, but it's a fantastic journey you're on. And I think that a lot of many that I've heard about and talked to, you've got a really practical approach to what it's going to take. It's a long game in this
Yeah,
industry
it
that you're
is.
in. Yeah. So
I'm
great.
doing my
Thanks so
best.
much, Brett. Thanks. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.